hopefully at the end we'll have some time for a little bit of a panel with a little more in-depth questioning. So as I say, we're getting a lot of different perspectives. Up next, we're going to have a perspective from someone who is applying blockchain technology to a very interesting field, and that is the supply chain. Our next presenter, Scott Nelson, has 35 years of experience, 35 years of experience in logistics, and he is grasping the blockchain with both hands, and he's going to tell us about his venture, Sweetbridge.
Is everyone good in the back? You guys all good? Everyone good? Great. I like to move around. I just want to thank Fintank for putting this on and letting us come. And I can't believe I'm on stage with Melanie, which is, I can't wait to talk to you afterwards. Because I think the people that are following this space from an economics perspective are the most interesting people in the world to me. And that's because I think what's fundamentally changing here is not yet completely recognized. Just like the internet initially didn't get...
Get on the floor now.
All right. Thought I was stepping on something. Just like the internet initially didn't get appreciated for what it was changing, and we didn't see things like Amazon really emerge as a business model that it is today. Even Amazon, when they first started, didn't have the business model they have today. We don't really understand what is possible because we are stuck in a mindset that comes from a world that we live in today. And it's what's fundamentally different about the blockchain is economics. So people talk about it in value, okay? Internet was information, blockchain value, but what's really different is economics. And economics is about how do we motivate behavior. So what we're seeing, all the different side effects, the price increases, all of the different things that are happening in the crypto markets, the volatilities, all these things are just a living out of motivations that are incented by a system which has been used to create value. Well, what we're doing now is we are changing the way you have to look at value, and we have new ways now we can look at value, and that's where I believe, personally, we're going to see a lot of innovation. Now, before I start into all of that, what we're about, I want to give you just a second to understand where I come from. I've spent 35 years in a crossroads of high finance, technology, and supply chain. And in that space, I built a business that did settlement for some of the largest corporations in the world. And in that process, I found out that the way companies do settlement in their supply chain is the screwiest, most arcane, craziest idea in the whole world. I couldn't believe what was going on. And we did a study of over 2 billion transactions. Countries all over the world, almost every single country on earth. Every single major category of business. And we found that the biggest problem in settlement was data. And I'll bet no one's ever heard that before. In fact, this is the reason it's seen as risky. 7% of those transactions never settled. But the reason they didn't settle was really data. It was not mostly bad actors. It was not mostly people doing bad things. It wasn't businesses failing. It was somebody typed something wrong. That was it. Okay? So there has to be a better way. And this is the core of Sweetbridge. There has to be a better way. This is our mantra. This is our why. This is why we exist and why we breathe. Now, we are trying to build a blockchain alliance. It's not just us, not just us, but a bunch of projects, a bunch of people working together to try to create a liquid supply chain. Now, how many people in here are supply chain professionals? Just help me understand the audience a little bit. 1, 2, okay, we've got just a few. All right. So let me do some definition of what we mean by supply chain. This picture here is probably what most people think of when they think of supply chain. containers coming from Asia on a vessel or something like that. Well, this is part of the supply chain, but this is not the whole supply chain. Let me give you another way to think about it. It's either Mother Nature or it came to you through a supply chain. Everything you eat, everything you own, everything you wear, everything you live in, everything you commute in, everything you work in, all the tools that you use came through a supply chain, unless Mother Nature grew it where it is or created it where it is. Everything else is the supply chain. The supply chain is about the management of global commerce. Not just global, but also local. So it applies just as much to a local farmer delivering food to that restaurant that you love to go to that has that great, farm-to-table vibe, as it does to Walmart doing international procurement all over the world. This represents $54 trillion of commerce. 2/3 of the global economy is what we're talking about. So it's a very large beast. And supply chain is about the management of the creation, storage, and delivery of all the things that generate that. Now the question that we asked is there a better way? Is there a better way that we could do this? And we got a bunch of people together and started thinking about the implications of the blockchain and what was going on, and said, if you started with a blank piece of paper and you said, forget everything I know about what happens today, forget everything about how we do it today, and I start with a blank piece of paper, what would I do? And what we came up with is this. How can we make everything liquid? Now, liquidity is not about water, but water has a very interesting behavior. You pour it on something and it seeks the path of least resistance. It automatically finds the lowest level, and that's the path it follows. So how can we make supply chains of the world operate like that? And this, believe it or not, took almost a year to get to this concept. A year of boiling down things until we finally recognized that this was actually something that could happen, and that this was actually one problem, not a whole bunch of problems. And by liquid, what we mean is not just that things happen in a way that is the path of least resistance, but we're talking about liquidity in capital. So how do you get access to liquid capital? To some of the people who are unbanked, to some of the people who are really banked. But how do you do it in a better way? Then how do we use assets better? Do you know that since in the last 50 years, amazing statistic from the Federal Reserve, that 50 years ago, the supply chain assets of the world had a better than 90% utilization. And now, that's down to 75%. Well, why is that? It's hyper-competition of something that isn't a commodity. We're treating something that isn't a commodity like it is. And many of the assets take a truck. A half-full truck doesn't cost very much to throw another pound on. But an empty truck costs a whole bunch to put a pound on. That difference in a hyper environment means you get all sorts of inefficiencies. Now, those inefficiencies can be fixed by basically making those assets liquid. So the asset seeks the customer, not the customer seeks the asset. And finally, people. It used to be a good deal to work for a company and get a wage. It's not so good a deal anymore in a world where the pace and size and scope of change is becoming greater and greater all the time. Because the company can't make a long-term commitment to us. It can't. Anyone who says that they know what the company is going to be doing 5 years from now, I don't know. That's becoming less credible. So how can we make talent liquid? How can we make you liquid so that the skills, the talent, the experience, the knowledge you have can be optimized in the same way that a business can optimize its profitability? How do we allow you to optimize your profitability? To create yourself as a reoccurring revenue stream of business activity. And so to do this, we spent a lot of time working on building a stack. Technology guys, we like to build stacks. So we built a stack. And this isn't the whole stack, it's just the stack we revealed. There's parts of the stack that we haven't revealed yet because we're still working on some of the designs. We don't want to talk about it yet because we may have the design wrong. But the bottom of the stack is about financial liquidity. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The second layer is about settlement. Now, settlement in this Bitcoin and digital blockchain era is typically synchronous, meaning when you make a transaction, the whole thing is that, hey, you know, the thing is basically going to settle or it's not going to settle. It's kind of binary. Okay? In trade, almost nothing is synchronous. It has to physically move. I mean, you know, it takes time, right? So it doesn't work. You have to have asynchronous processes. But you want the same kind of assurance. So in my last job, we worked on risk management and came up with some ideas about how to do that that were very effective. And what we looked at is, okay, the lessons we learned from that, is there any way you can apply that to a much bigger scale? And what we realized is there really isn't a problem of risk in the supply chain. There's $54 trillion of profit. That's what GDP is. So that's after all the business failures, that's after all the bad actors, after all the fires, after all the thefts, it still generates that profit. So if you can basically hedge all of the risk of the supply chain with the profit of the supply chain, you basically eliminate the risk in the supply chain. You can do that globally. I'll tell you in a minute why that's so important. The third is if you can track accounting-wise 4 things. The difference between an asset purchase and a liability in terms of credits and debits, and the difference between a sale of goods or services and an expense. Within an economic environment, you can tell a lot about what's going on in the company financially. You can tell whether working capital is improving or decreasing. You can tell whether margin is going up or down. And you can tell what's happening in terms of change to the balance sheet. Now, you can't do this with anything that's off-chain, but if it's on-chain, you can do this. And if you basically only care about what's on-chain, you don't care what's happening off-chain, then you can use this information to de-risk the counterparty risk in the supply chain. This information allows you to do resource sharing. This means you can take a warehouse and share the warehouse. So think of Uber, but a warehouse. You can take a factory, a 3D printer that knows how to print engines, costs tens of millions of dollars. You can take one of these and you can basically turn it into a shared device. A device that you basically use. And when you use it, the owner participates in the economic value generated, which is tracked by the accounting system, enforced by the settlement process, and all of the activity has got liquidity because the money is free. And finally, you can do the same with talent. And you can do this all with a set of relatively simple algorithms that are protocols. And that's the protocol stack. And across this whole thing is risk management. Now, it's not just myself doing this. We've got about 22 full-time people that are involved in this project right now as contributors. We're an open source nonprofit organization. Everything we're building is open source. We've actually applied for patents to all of the protocols that we have because we want to make sure that they stay free, that they stay something that people can use. And then we have another about 40 contributors total, including Fed Reserve economists, people that have many, many years of experience in technology and blockchain going back as old as it almost is, working on the project, people from law, people from government, all contributing in different ways. And the alliance, these are just the people that we can talk about. One of the key members that exists in our alliance is Arizona State University. Arizona State University is the largest university in the United States. Their blockchain lab, and it is sponsoring, is one of the key sponsors of Sweetbridge, an alliance partner. And we have about 22 other people that are basically going to be announced on this list over the next 30 days that aren't on this list. But as you can see, it includes people like law firms and others, lobbyist groups and others. Well, why? Why this diversity? Because it's more than the blockchain. The blockchain is meeting two other technical revolutions at the same time. One is IoT, and IoT can be thought of as kind of part of the blockchain in some ways, but not in others. It's really a different thing. The third is AIs. And it's all about these three technologies when you're talking about the supply chain. These three technologies are going to have a profound implication on the supply chain. And what we're trying to do, and Mac right back here in the back raises hand. Mac is the head of our supply chain alliance. He is trying to bring together all of the projects, all of the people that are working in IoT, AI, and supply chain, and the blockchain. We're just trying to say, hey, let's get together and work together. We started looking at this, and there were 500 projects on supply chain in the world working in the blockchain. I didn't know, you couldn't find most of these if you tried. That's the problem. There's a lot of great work. The other thing that's interesting is many of these have functioning code on a blockchain working inside of a corporate environment. Because most of them are sponsored by some corporation somewhere, and it's just some small amount of funding they're giving to a couple guys starving in a garage. Literally. But they're doing great work. We want to bring those people together and say, let's all work together. In addition to that, we need go-to-market strategies. So we've actually created 2 ecosystems. We have 6 others in formation. These ecosystems are independent from Sweetbridge. One is for the supply chain. The other is for law. And we've actually been bringing together law firms, bringing together law services, technology firms, to rethink the practice of law and to do the thing that has to be done in order for all of this to work. And that is, we have to take the assets of the world and we have to bind them in contracts that can be supported in real-world environments. Not just to say that you got ownership, not just for title, but for defense when it's challenged, for dealing with disposition when there's a default on, say, a loan. All these things have to be put in legal contracts that exist in the real world and paired with smart contracts that exist in the blockchain world. So we're trying to do that. And these law firms are looking at and talking about how do we re-envision the practice of law in light of the blockchain. And they're actually looking at the negative drivers, like fee for time, which the reason for this, by the way, is that you can't copyright a contract. You can't copyright a contract. Anybody can take a contract, copy it, and use it. No protection. But if you take the assets of the world and you write a contract to basically put those things on the blockchain, and then you insure your contract, you can defend it. You can use it, and a small fee, say 3 basis points, almost impossible to feel, can go to the firms that basically create it and defend it, and the programmers that basically build the work that does that, and that will actually generate more money for legal services than is generated currently today in the practice of law. Now, let's focus in on liquidity real quick. And this is the key problem in liquidity. For those of you where this is below the point where you can see it at the bottom, it's the problem that there's a time gap from the time somebody orders something and they basically pay for it in the supply chain. It doesn't work like you go into a restaurant or going down to the store and buying something at CVS. They don't get a credit card and the merchant gets the money a couple days later. That's not how it works. Place an order, somebody has to bill to the order or ship to the order. You get the goods, you get an invoice, then you basically pay the bill. There are tens of trillions of dollars tied up in this process. In inventory, in receivables, in the order before it gets built, in raw materials that's used to build the order, and this goes down through the supply chain. If you're a rice farmer in Vietnam, the average, I'm told, I didn't know this till last week, we were in London presenting, and actually had some guys from PwC come up afterwards and told us that they'd just done a study for the government of Vietnam, and the average rice farmer, they said, made $40,000. Some make $2,000, some make hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the average is 40. And on average, they basically have to discount their rice by 20 to 30% to basically sell the rice in advance so they get enough money to live through the crop production. This is a problem. Okay, this is a problem. Because it not only makes the rice more expensive to you, it means the farmer doesn't get the benefit of their labor as much as they should. So we're going to fix that problem by using a 2-coin, 2-token system. One is either the most exciting and or the most uninteresting token you've ever heard about in your life, depending on your point of view. One is a stable coin pegged to different fiat currencies. And so for the crypto investors here, they go, why the heck would you want one of those? Well, let me explain why you want one of those. Nobody wants to peg their receivables in something that is going to be volatile as opposed to pegging it in fiat currency. How many of you who own Bitcoin have gone someplace where it accepted Bitcoin and then, well, I don't want to sell this thing because it might go up tomorrow. In fact, it might go up in the next 5 minutes. So, you know, is now the time? Is now the time? Do I buy that pizza? No. So you want something that's stable. You want something that's pegged to fiat currency. This is critical to get businesses to do serious transaction volume on the blockchain. If you don't have this, the idea that the world's going to use Bitcoin to basically buy and sell things is absurd. It will just never happen. There's a million reasons why it'll never happen, but that won't happen. The next is Sweetcoin. Sweetcoin works like FDIC insurance in our ecosystem. Except you can kind of get the benefits that the FDIC insurance provides, and you get some rewards for doing that. First is you get to borrow more money in our liquidity platform than you would be able to otherwise. Second, you get 0 interest rates if you want, or just lower interest rates. Third, you get settlement transactions on the bus for free. And fourth, you get a crypto to fiat bridge. It's actually going to be a commodity bridge through one of our exchanges in multiple legal jurisdictions at no cost, which is one of the big impediments today to crypto environments working in business transaction environments, is that the cost to move from the fiat world to the crypto world is really high. Very high. So both of these tokens, we have spent, well, probably as much or at least equal to the amount of money that any project has ever spent on lawyers And not just in the United States, not because we're just concerned about, the US, but because we want to work everywhere in the world. So in 9 legal jurisdictions around the world. Both of these are commodities. We're relatively convinced they're commodities. They're designed, they don't meet the Howey test, and they are regulated. They're just regulated by different bodies. In the United States, the Commodities Exchange Commission. So let me give you an example of how you can use this, and I'm going to make it personal for people, not a business example, and then I'm going to bring it back to a business example. Let's say you have 50 Ether. You can tell when we built this slide at 200.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. No. So that's worth $10,000. You can deposit that Ether into one of our portfolios on your smartphone or your computer, and you can borrow 50% of the value of that Ether without selling it, and you get Bridgecoin. And you can use it for whatever you want. So you can use it to go buy dinner, you can buy a new computer, maybe you want one of those new ant miners, does the terahashes, or you could use it to buy more coins, maybe. If you're a crypto investor, that might be interesting. And let's say that Ether goes up in price, so you want to get your stuff back. Well, you just have to pay back the 500 Bridgecoin. You never sold your coin, but you got to use it. So the advantage to the crypto holder here, Alice, is she got to use the value locked up in her cryptocurrency without having to sell her cryptocurrency. And this is the same thing we're talking about doing for businesses. So if you don't understand how the supply chain works, the exact same thing can be done in the supply chain with inventory and with receivables and other things. And Alice's benefit here is she got to make this $5,000 profit because she got to use some of her money to go do something she needed to do, but didn't have to get rid of the thing that she wanted to get rid of. And this is the problem in business. In business today, we end up having to either sell or borrow money at high interest rates for things that we need to do to stay in business. And because of that, we liquidate things that would be worth more money potentially in the future. Like we sell an invoice at a discount to an invoice discount. Or we accept credit from a bank that basically charges us a high interest rate. Or we sell our crop early, a year in advance, in order to basically grow the crop, and we discount it by a massive amount of money. It's the same thing. Okay, it's exactly the same thing. So if you imagine Alice as a business, you can imagine what happens. So our liquidity protocol, what it allows you to do is lend yourself money on assets you already own, interest-free, without another party. This is you becoming the bank of you. You might think that's impossible, but this is the basis of banking for the last 4,500 years, asset-based lending. Many of you may know, some of you may know this, but in 1850, there were thousands of currencies in circulation in the United States. They were called banknotes. You got them by taking your assets into a bank. Borrowing, they would give you their banknotes. You would spend those with the local merchant or whatever. And then to get your asset back, you would get it back. They operated kind of like pawn shops operate today. Kind of the same idea. Banks then traded between one another in something called specie. That was gold. All we've done is said, there has to be a better way. And this is just one of the many kinds of implications of the blockchain. The blockchain allows you to re-envision how value is transferred. It allows you to create new entire economic systems and to basically allow yourself to look at things differently. Because you don't need to trust a third party to enforce a set of rules, like a set of banking laws, which are there for your protection. You don't need to trust that. You can now encode that, actually in the blockchain, have the blockchain enforce those laws, enforce those rules. Now, Melanie talked about mortgages, where you pick the kind of mortgage. What this leads to is you taking any asset you have. I'll put it in personal terms so you don't have to try to connect it to all the business jargon. Let's say you take your car, your furniture, your stock portfolio, your investment portfolio, and your house. And you could put that into a portfolio. And you just had a line of credit. You could basically draw against it. And that line of credit, you could set up, do I want a balloon payment? Not for this one. I want to do an amortized schedule. Do I want to do this in 5 years? Nah, I want to do it in a year. And as you bought and sold assets, they would just go in and out of that portfolio. You wouldn't have to go through any other intermediary. That's what we're doing for business. And you'll be able to use it for yourself, although you're not our target. You're not our target market. We're not trying to basically give every consumer in the world a free ticket to go spend more money. We are trying to help the supply chains of the world. Because if we can unlock just the 27 trillion locked up in receivables in the blockchain, if we can free that, that will actually grow the global economy in a meaningful way. Now, one of the things that Melanie brought up that's really important to understand is that the blockchain today is in no condition to handle all the assets of the world. She's absolutely correct about that. But one of the things that, I don't know whether we would agree or disagree on, is that it's not going to be about a blockchain. Blockchains are going to be like computer chips. The relationship to the internet fails here. Each blockchain has a use case it's good at. It's like a computer chip. The CPU is good at certain things and bad at others. The APU is good at certain things and bad at others. You don't want to the GPU. You don't want to use your graphics processor to do the graphics. To do the general computing running of your operating system. You want to do the graphics. Okay? Same with blockchains. Same with blockchains. So with that, I'll take a few questions. Yeah.
What happens if they default? You just
Great question.
You build all that in, right?
Yep, it's all built in. Fundamentally, what happens is that their assets get sold. And if someone's smart, they'll ask the following question.
All right, so how long is the time frame on this? If I get a free loan from you, how long do I have
You
to
set
pay
the
it off?
terms when you do it. You just have to follow the terms that you set, or you can renegotiate your terms whenever you want.
Is there a maximum?
There is a maximum, depends on the asset class mix in your portfolio.
Okay.
Yep.
How do the asset classes account for depreciation?
Great question. So some assets appreciate, some are somewhat stable, some are volatile, some depreciate. So each asset class has a different value and for a different period of time. Fish is worth a lot for the first 3 days, and then it starts falling in value really rapidly. So fish you can't use as an asset for very long, or borrow very much against it because of that exact reason. Basically, the same rules that would apply in the world today kind of still apply. Yep.
What are the, this is very profound. Just when you think about it, I was an asset-based lender once upon a time when I didn't know anything about banking, but I was doing all these big deals my junior year, my career, and just the whole process of processing is like, if you can unlock that piece, just getting it to the underwriting committee at any different level, even just, you analyze it, you got to get it to the supervising banker, and then he has to give him just that, and meanwhile, there's a company out there and a whole supply chain depending on that. But with that said, my point is that I've seen lots of different types of asset classes and made-up asset classes and whatever.
Yeah.
What are the top, let's say, 5 groupings that you are dealing with right now, given that this is, it's
So
an
we're
ecosystem?
so we're being opportunistic about that because so there's lots of projects in the blockchain that need assets to be on the blockchain, but not all of them are really thinking about this holistically. Because you need more than just to be able to say, I have a title to the asset. You need to be able to sell the asset, transfer it. What about when you sell it across national boundaries? What about tax? What about trade compliance? It's just a bunch of stuff that you have to worry about. We're trying to look at this holistically, and we're trying to let the legal ecosystem, through their own financial incentives, through a set of tokens that we will be announcing in addition to these in the next few months, which are designed to incentivize lawyers to basically create these things. We're going to let them basically decide which ones kind of opportunistically they're going to create. There are so many asset classes in the world, as you know,
Right.
and there are so many different legal jurisdictions. Even in the United States, you might have a legal jurisdiction difference between counties.
So the innovation will be, obviously there's like decentralized apps on one end, the front end side, let's say hypothetically, but it sounds like it's going to be more, the innovation is going to be actually in the smart contract itself. I mean, that's the real
Yes.
what is it? Okay.
Yes. One more question?
Maybe, let's go one more quick one.
One question. Okay.
Who does the valuation of the assets?
So initially we're using a economic council that we've put together to basically do that. Ultimately, we'd like to basically do that through some kind of prediction market. That has some problems with gaming that we're not sure have been solved by any of the attempts to do this in the past. So we're kind of going to watch that whole area mature here for the next year or so before we kind of let that happen. And you could also argue that long term you could turn over to AIs. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott.